You're welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. It is time now for the week that was, when we take a look at the top stories that made headlines around the globe this week. And we'll start with Israel and Hezbollah, which have resumed counterattacks on Tuesday, a day after a massive Israeli bombardment killed at least 500 people, sent thousands fleeing from southern Lebanon, and put the two sides on the brink of all-out war. Displaced families slept in shelters hastily set up in schools in Beirut and the coastal city of Sidon, with hotels quickly booked to capacity or rooms priced beyond the means of many families. Those who did not find shelter slept in their cars, in parks, or along the seaside. Well-wishers offered up empty apartments or rooms in their houses in social media posts, while volunteers set up a kitchen at an empty gas station in Beirut to cook meals for the displaced. Israel's military said that 75 rockets had been fired from Lebanon into northern Israel since the early hours of Tuesday morning, igniting several fires and damaging buildings in the country's north. The rockets came in 5 volleys throughout the morning, the largest of them containing 50 rockets launched towards the Upper Galilee area. This is where we are as far as the Middle East crisis is concerned. This story is talking about Tuesday, but we know, of course, that things have deteriorated, further up till yesterday, even yesterday when Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, was at the United Nations, making justifications. But here we are. We're not just talking Gaza anymore. We're talking Israel and Hezbollah. We're talking Iran, the possibility of escalation going to Iran. Del toll is rising, people are dying, buildings are being destroyed, cities are being destroyed. But then Israel says that he has justification because it all started with the attacks coming from Hezbollah, I believe in October or thereabout. It looks to me like the world, particularly at this time, that everybody, that is somebody is in New York talking global politics, but then there's little that can be done given the very staunch stance of Israel. I'm not too sure if a ceasefire will be in the horizon anytime soon, but it looks to me like if UN is handicapped and the global Robocop that America, appears to be, it's also not, they do not appear to be doing enough. It looks like we will continue to witness this atrocious humanitarian disaster in the Middle East.
Definitely, you make mention UN, which a lot of people were thinking that in itself would have led to some kind of conversation. But looking at the speech that Netanyahu gave on Thursday, he appeared to have, brushed off this initiative by the US and other world powers that were looking for this 21-day ceasefire between the Jewish state and Iran-backed Hezbollah. But he's just gone forward and said this is going to go with full force. He really spoke in very strong biblical terms, even making reference to the days of Moses in the Bible. And what really, stands out for me is the fact that he keeps pointing to the Islamic Republic's stifling of dissent. And he also mentioned, or rather he called on the international community to end what he called the global appeasement of Iran. Now, when we think about this, he says we are winning. But really and truly, people are dying. In just your intro, we saw how many people were displaced. Over 600 people right now accounted for that have lost their lives. A lot of people having to leave their homes and all of this. At the end of the day, when two nations are fighting or are at war, it's really the people who suffer, the people on the ground who suffer. And on the side of Iran, of course, it's important to also note that they were talking about their access to or their building of nuclear weapons has actually increased from about 20% to 60% as of the last conversation that was had. So that's also something that world leaders also need to pay attention to, because the more back and forth that happens, the more people continue to suffer. And I was really hoping that this UN, the UN General Assembly that just happened would have been the perfect time for these two leaders to come together and figure out how to put an end to this war. Leila.
It's really worrying, especially what happened yesterday after Netanyahu gave his speech at the UNGA. the Israeli Defense Force went on with serious airstrikes in an area called Dahye in Lebanon, in southern Beirut. This is a very densely populated area, about 700,000 people living there. Airstrikes continued all night, and they say that they targeted or were targeting a Hezbollah command center in Dahye. Now, they claim this command center was underneath residential apartments. So Netanyahu can stand in front of the United Nations General Assembly and he can say, our war is not with the Lebanese people, our war is with Hezbollah. But you can easily attack residential areas like that. Children, UNICEF is reporting that at least 50 children have died in the past 2 days alone. And this is such a tragedy because if indeed the IDF is saying, it's not confirmed yet, that must be made very clear, but the IDF is saying that they may have killed the leader of Hezbollah in these latest attacks, Hassan Nasrallah. And if they have indeed killed Hassan Nasrallah in these attacks, the retaliation that we're going to be seeing is going to be far more than a few rockets going over to northern Israel. We're talking about a full-blown regional conflict here. And it's worrying because I don't know how the wider global community didn't see this coming sooner. The US has just approved more money for arms to Israel. On top of that, the UK is now trying to step back and say, we're not going to provide certain arms to Israel anymore. Why is that only coming now? Why wasn't that coming when all of this force was being thrown into even Gaza, where 49,000 people so far have reportedly died? You know, it's really worrying because the violation of international law is so clear to see. People are fleeing everywhere. I have a friend in Lebanon, for example, who had to leave her home with her 2 kids. I spoke to her yesterday and she said she doesn't even know if her home is still standing. She has no idea because they can't go back there. They can't get to the borders because she doesn't feel it's safe to take 2 young children to the borders to try and escape through the borders. Young children are having to sleep at night, hearing these explosions, and we are on the brink of full-blown war now, and it's just a shame. Yeah, it really is. On to our next story, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned world leaders on Tuesday that impunity, inequality, and uncertainty are creating an unstable, unsustainable world where a growing number of countries believe they should have a get-out-of-jail-free card. Now, citing deepening geopolitical divisions, wars with no end in sight, climate change, and nuclear and emerging weapons, he said humanity is, in quote, edging towards the unimaginable, a powder keg that risks engulfing the world. But he said the challenges being faced are solvable if the international community confronts the uncertainty of unmanaged risks, the inequality that underlies injustices and grievances, and the impunity that undermines international law and the UN's founding principles.
A world of inequality, where injustices and grievances threaten to undermine countries or even push them over the edge. And a world of uncertainty, where unmanaged global risks threaten our future in unknowable ways. These worlds of impunity, inequality, and uncertainty are connected and colliding. Excellencies, the level of impunity in the world is politically indefensible and morally intolerable. Today, a growing number of governments and others feel entitled to get out of jail free card. They can trample international law. They can violate the United Nations Charter. They can turn a blind eye to international human rights conventions or the decisions of international courts. They can thumb their nose at international humanitarian law. They can invade another country, lay waste to whole societies, or utterly disregard the welfare of their own people. And nothing will happen. We see this age of impunity everywhere, in the Middle East, in the heart of Europe, in the Horn of Africa, and beyond. The war in Ukraine is spreading with no signs of letting up. Civilians are paying the price in rising death tolls and shattered lives and communities. It is time for a just peace based on the UN Charter, on international law, and on UN resolutions. Meanwhile, Gaza is a non-stop nightmare that threatens to take the entire region with it. Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza. Let's be clear. Nothing can justify the abhorrent acts of terror committed by Hamas on October 7th or the taking of hostages, both of which I have repeatedly condemned. And nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. The speed and scale of the The speed and scale of the killing and destruction in Gaza are unlike anything in my years as Secretary General. More than 200 of our own staff have been killed, many with their families. And yet the women and men of the United Nations continue to deliver humanitarian aid. And I know you join me in paying a special tribute to UNRWA and to all humanitarians in Gaza. The international community must mobilize for an immediate ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of hostages, and the beginning of an irreversible process towards a two-state solution.
Okay, now we have the Secretary General of the United Nations making this call, but it's interesting because the UNGA high-level week has been going on all week this week, and there are many questions about just how much is actually being done to achieve a ceasefire, to achieve peace. It's all well and good having this to say, but there's not been much action in terms of actually bringing that peace to the forefront. Instead, what we've seen is escalated tensions this week, in a week where leaders are coming together to solve these problems and put solutions forward. So it's quite worrying, but what he's said is right, because we're on the brink of so much here, and the world is really vulnerable right now.
Absolutely. I get the point that Guterres was making about, the world leaders rising up to stop the calamity in terms of the humanitarian crisis, and then calling for ceasefire. But then, this is not the first time that he will say things like that. Israel and Gaza, Israel and Hamas have been on it over Gaza for, almost a year or thereabouts now. He's been speaking. United Nations as a body has been speaking. But then what have they achieved, frankly speaking? The speech that he made to the world on that podium, what will he achieve? What weight, does he carry? Without those that we have mentioned earlier in the first story of Israel and Hezbollah, without them coming together to say that we demand unequivocally ceasefire, I don't think that. I think that this is just mere posturing, and I have very little, to applaud here, rather than to say that yes, you have spoken nicely, but then what weight does it carry? What assurances does he give anybody? Not to me, not to the media, not to the people dying in Gaza or in Lebanon. I get the point to an appreciable extent that Israel is also fighting a survival battle. But then it is for the United Nations, particularly the Security Council, to moderate how you deal with existential threat, and not just to go haywire, fighting different battles all over the place at the same time. And the only thing that we get on a world stage at UNGA is calling on world leaders who know what's going on, who know what time it is, to call for a ceasefire. That Netanyahu is saying that will never happen under his watch, at least at this time. I'm not impressed, but hey, here we are.
I definitely agree with the two of you when it comes to posturing. I remember when in his speech, he made reference to what's going on as a powder keg that risks engulfing the world. And that's where we are, truly. But when we look at this latest clarion call, from Guterres itself, let's stop talking. Let's actually see. Let's have the conversations, yes, but let those conversations lead to actions. If you have a world leader that is, Benjamin Netanyahu coming out and saying that I'm not going to stop, I'm not going to agree to this ceasefire, then what are the ramifications for those actions? What are the consequences? And of course, when he continues to, cite, deepening geopolitical divisions and saying that the solutions to the crisis require some form of, some kind of solution requires the reform of these international institutions, then exactly what reforms are these? Is posturing. We've been talking about this on the morning show almost every week for months now. And like you rightfully said, there are people whose lives are being affected. Let's stop talking and let's just let's see some more action. But still sticking to the UN General Assembly, President Bola Tinubu is calling for debt forgiveness for developing countries and measures to recover proceeds of corruption and illicit financial flows from such countries. Speaking at the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Tinubu emphasized the importance of inclusivity, equality, and cooperation in addressing global challenges such as terrorism, climate change, poverty, and food crisis. The president also urged world leaders to strengthen multilateralism through deeper cooperation among United Nations member states. President Tinubu, represented by Vice President Kashim Shettima, decried the rise of singularity and nationalism, which he believes undermines collective efforts to resolve global issues. He reaffirmed Nigeria's commitment to multilateralism and expressed concern about the UN's ability to sustain its relevance and resilience.
Process of corruption and illicit financial flows constitute a huge chunk of resources needed for sustainable development. The recovery and return of such funds to states of origin is a fundamental principle of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Therefore, the international community must promote practical measures to strengthen international cooperation to recover and return stolen assets and to eradicate safe havens that facilitate illicit flows of funds from developing countries to the developed economies. There is also the urgent need to promote fair and inclusive tax regimes in the world. Nigeria helped introduce the resolution on promotion of inclusive and effective international tax cooperation at the UN. We acknowledge the progress made in the adoption of the terms of reference of the UN Framework Convention on Tax Cooperation. We should deepen this initiative and work towards a UN Framework Convention on Tax Cooperation. Similarly, we must ensure that any reform of the international financial system includes comprehensive debt relief measures to enable sustainable financing for development. Countries of the Global South cannot make meaningful economic progress without special concessions and a review of their current debt burden. The present administration pays due regard to the imperatives of creating a conducive national environment for investment and the ease of doing business. Last year, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu signed 4 executive orders to curb double taxation. The government also established the Presidential Task Force on review of fiscal policy and tax reform. These measures are geared towards not only boosting investor confidence in Nigeria, but also to ensure investors make reasonable profit from their investments.
All right, that's Vice President Kashim Shettima there. Shaitan at the UNGA, in New York. And I think that the first context to establish is the fact that, yes, the president was meant to be there. He chose not to go in person, stayed back, given the series of issues that we've been dealing with in Nigeria, particularly the flooding in Borno State. So I like that. I think this is important to highlight that the president, was, shall we say, reasonable and considerate in saying the vice president should represent him. And I think that Kashim Shettima did very well in representing his principal, in delivering a powerful message, even though a good chunk of the message that he delivered, the president himself highlighted almost the same thing last year at UNGA when he was there. So when we go to these international parties year on year. January, they'll be getting ready to go to Davos and things like that. What fresh demands are we making? Are there other ways that we are pushing our position as different from the previous things that people would just rehash speeches and statements, and then we go there and read and stand on global, platform? So while I commend the fact that it was a punchy, it was a well-delivered message, it wasn't particularly new. And I'm not so sure if we will expect anything new. I take interest particularly in the area of debt relief and forgiveness that the president, mentioned. But then how are we approaching this? Are we, for example, taking a cue from what former President Obasanjo did with Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, when Obasanjo was the president, that there was a lot of strategy behind it, and we succeeded in getting a substantial debt relief that was impactful on our economy. This time around, beyond just mentioning this thing at UNGA, is there any other thing that we're doing, even though it makes sense to make that demand? While we are making the demand, are we showing that, truly speaking, that we deserve, debt forgiveness, given the manner in which we go there gallivanting, large entourage, and then basically not looking like we are desperately in need of
debt forgiveness?
Do you get, very quickly, if you don't mind.
I think
Leila.
one important point that he did make was also on calling for deeper cooperation among UN member states. Take the UN Security Council, for example. There's no reason why Nigeria should not be a permanent member sitting on the UN Security Council. We're the most populous nation in Africa, the most populous black nation in the world. And African leaders are calling for at least 2 permanent African seats on the UN Security Council. And that call he made for deeper cooperation, I hope that's something that's pushed forward, not just by him, but other African leaders that are there representing the continent, because it's so important. Decisions are being made that affect us.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we don't have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council.
This is something that we've been pushing for a long time.
Yeah.
And then the part of the question is that if a seat should go to Africa, who goes for Africa? Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa. Those are the things that we need to tidy, even at our home end. But of course, they are making progress. All right, we proceed. The Federal High Court, sitting in Abuja, has adjourned the alleged money laundering case filed by Nigeria's anti-corruption agency, the EFCC, against a former Kogi State governor, Yahaya Bello, till October 30th. The adjournment by Justice Emeka Nwite comes as Bello heads to the Supreme Court to appeal against a warrant for his arrest issued by the judge on April 17th. When the matter came up for hearing, Bello's counsel, Ame Udoyi, told the court that the issue of arraignment of his client was the subject matter of an appeal already entered by him at the Supreme Court. He therefore prayed the trial court to await the decision of the Supreme Court. Counsel for the EFCC, Kemi Pinheiro, however, told the court that Yahaya Bello's legal team is turning the court into a place for entertainment. And entertainment is it, isn't it? I mean, Shaitan, over time, given what has been happening between Yahaya Bello and the EFCC.
Honestly, he's fondly called the white lion, I believe. But I believe, a lion has no foe. If you are being called forward and said, okay, these are, you're being charged for these crimes, or we need to actually have a conversation with you, just come forward and, have this, it reminds me of what happened about 5 months ago. And that's what I really want to address about this Yahaya Bello and EFCC situation. Because what we've seen 5 months ago when they went to pick him up was that he was under the protection, quote and unquote, of the current governor of the state. And even with the arrest that was made, of course, when he was in there, he had immunity as the governor. And the EFCC bided their time. They started their investigations. And they waited until he didn't have any immunity anymore. So what really confuses me is why there is this extension of immunity from the current governor to the past governor. It doesn't work like that. And,
Who's extending it?
And for some reason, they're not able to pick him up. They've said
But he went to them, he walked to their domot.
Yes, but
and they refused to pick him.
Why is that?
I don't know.
No, because they have said it before that they don't want a situation where it escalates and you are having security operatives from the EFCC.
Yeah, but the same day that you didn't want it escalate, you went to the Kogi state, the Kogi home in Abuja.
Yes.
Guns blazing. To try to arrest the same man who walked to your premises earlier in the day, and that you couldn't do anything about.
And that speaks
It's a joke, isn't it? On the part of
you
the
would
two.
expect that, because there's this whole back and forth about, we're not trying to offend any, we don't want to fight with her. No, at this point, it should be something that happens at the top level. Let the head of the EFCC call the head of whatever body it is that is protecting this person at the moment, and let it be sorted among them. Why are we having this?
He's been charged to court.
Yes.
He will have his day in court. But what is the process of getting him to at least be, be arraigned? I think that's where we are. He says that the case that you're trying to do, I've already appealed it, and it has gone to appeal court. This is where we are. October 30th is when that will be heard. But then while they were waiting, I'm saying that in spite of the untidiness around it, the man that you declared wanted, that you gave his name to Interpol, that you've been looking for all over, that you were not able to pick, walked down, to your premises, and you were basically confused. You were in disarray as to what to do with him until he left. Leela.
I mean, all I'll add to this is, at the end of the day, it's a high public interest case, So in order not for people to start losing trust in the judiciary that's already so low, I mean, let's just get this over and done with.
Yeah.
That's all I'll add to this. So let's see what happens come October 30th if it doesn't get adjourned again. And we'll take it from there. But it's a highly publicly interesting case for the public. Excuse my mix-up of words there. And it's just very important that the judiciary show that they're serious about this. So let's see what comes October 30th.
Definitely.
Correct.
All right, then. Next story, Leila.
All right, so the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN Monetary Policy Committee, has raised the interest rate by 50 basis points to 27.25%, the fifth hike since February 2024. CBN Governor Olayemi Cardoso disclosed this during a press briefing at the end of the 297th MPC in Abuja on Tuesday. The development comes as the country's inflation rate eased for the second consecutive month in August to 32.15%, according to the National Bureau of Statistics.
I mean, this is the fifth time that the CBN will be raising interest rates this year, since February. And it's tough. Frankly speaking, it's tough. I get the point of, trying to reduce the impact of inflation. But then when you go this route, I'm not sure the strategy that Mr. Yemi Cardoso is trying to pursue as to how this will actually tame the cost of living crisis and then engender production. People can, small businesses can go to banks. You can borrow at this level. I think that it is not convincing, even when you see that on paper. This seems to be the goal. How you now get to the destination where you can now deal with inflation, because this has never happened in Nigeria. This has never happened under any CBN governor. I get the point that these are desperate times and desperate measures are required, but then how is it telling on the pocket of you and I? How is it telling on businesses that are supposed to run to keep people afloat? I'm not so sure if they're getting it.
Well, I mean, it may attract foreign investments, but for the local market and local businesses, it has the completely opposite effect.
Totally.
So we have to wait and see. We have to wait and see.
While we're waiting, let's hope that...
While we're waiting, you are feeling it. I mean, analysts had expected that the Apex Bank's MPC to take a slightly dovish stance in the interest rates, especially in the light of the 2 consecutive month raises. But if they're trying to use that to slow down the inflation, I don't know. Like you said, I don't know how that's going to work. But we'll keep monitoring this story and see. Hopefully, we're already in September, that we're not seeing... October is already here, that we don't see another increase before the year runs out. Now let's move on to the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Kudirat Kekere-Ekun, who says she will not tolerate any act of corruption in the judiciary on her watch. She vows to instill the highest level of discipline in judiciary, deal decisively with erring judicial officers who indulge in conflicting court judgments, and those who deliberately abuse court processes. Kekere-Ekun issued the stern warnings to clean the UNGA stable when she appeared before the Senate for screening and confirmation of her appointment on Wednesday. Well, There you have it. The CJN has, finally been confirmed. The fifth most important person in the nation right now, and a lot of eyes were on her. When she was, of course, when she did have initial swearing in and now her confirmation. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the judicial system, as in when it comes to even how, like she mentioned, judicial officers have like separate, or how they respond to separate filings or, judgments, how even we have in the correctional system, people that are in prison or are in jail for offenses that they don't necessarily need to be in there for. We saw with the, the floodings, 2 different prisons that actually had their walls gone. There's so much to do when we think about the infrastructure, of course, the discipline that is within the judicial system, and of course, even the corruption. So we'll continue to, observe Madam Kekereekun, and hopefully she's the one that turns things around in our judicial. Her Lordship.
Lila.
I mean, she seems willing to clean up the judiciary. The question is, can she achieve that? It's key for restoring public trust, so obviously we hope that she does, because the judiciary needs a lot of cleaning up. So we have to wait and see, and I wish her the best. I'm sure everyone wishes her the best in this role, and hopefully she is able to do that. It's important. For far too long, we've been experiencing the same issues with the judicial system, and it's high time we have someone who can be at the forefront of making sure that we finally turn things around. Is she going to be that person is the question that's open-ended. We have to wait and see, but she does seem willing to really want to do that.
Absolutely. I queue behind you in the sense that, the judiciary needs some cleansing. But part of, the sort of cleansing that we are talking about, it's not just corruption in terms of money exchanging hands. It's also about processes and procedure. I'm not sure if what President Bola Ahmed Tinubu did in swearing her in at that time was the most proper thing to do, given the fact that she had not been confirmed, by the Senate. Was she, sworn in as in an acting capacity, or did that come before because now that she's been confirmed, maybe we should be expecting, swearing in. So processes and procedures are important, and those are the sort of things that she should be interested in. On the corruption level, I think it's important, given the fact that one of the first things, under her watch that she'll be dealing with will be the Edo, election. Election matters are important as far as, the issue of corruption is concerned in Nigeria, given the fact that many people, even in the judiciary, that, our Lordship will be aware of, are already on the red list of America, who can no longer go to America. Yeah. Like a few, former governors, like a few politicians, like a few, monarchs that we know, who cannot go, to America at this point. Those are the kind of things that should be of primary importance, to her. Judges have been better paid now, isn't it? Judiciary workers are getting 300% at a time that, people are struggling to get, 70,000 and 77,000 for youth corpers. That's important, but then she will need to, be seen to be the, shall we say, the Margaret Thatcher of the Nigerian judiciary at this point. We move on, Leila.
All right, let's move on. Following the explosive 15 million naira bribery allegations involving the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission and popular cross-dresser Bobrisky, the federal government on Thursday suspended 2 officers of the Nigerian Correctional Service who were suspected to be complicit in the scandal. Now, the 2 officers suspended over the bribery allegations include Michael Anugwa, Deputy Controller of Corrections in charge of the Medium Security Custodial Center, and Shikiru Adekunle, the Deputy Controller of Corrections in charge of the Maximum Security Custodial Center in Lagos. Bobrisky had alleged in a viral audio recording that his quote-unquote godfather, alongside the Controller General of the Nigerian Correctional Service, Haliru Nababa, had ensured that he served his 6-month sentence in a private apartment and not in the prison. Now, this is another public interest case, and honestly speaking, it was, in my opinion anyway, the right decision to suspend officers that are alleged to be complicit in the allegations that we are seeing here.
Were the officers mentioned?
Were the officers,
mentioned in the allegation? in the voice note that led to all this?
No, I don't believe. I don't. I think
they
it
weren't
must have been
mentioned
an
in the voice
investigation
notes,
that
but
led
there
to
must
that.
have exactly. There must have been an investigation.
An investigation would have led to that. I mean, at least who was in charge?
It's the officer in charge of the maximum security side and the minimal security side in that particular prison.
Yeah.
So, of course, if they're at the forefront, they're going to they're going to hold them responsible, you know, and find out exactly what happened here. This is the problem that we see a lot, where people can pay their way out of certain things.
Yeah.
And indeed, it's good that this is being investigated, and let's see what comes of it. I understand there's actually even a second part to that voice recording that was initially released that I don't think has been released yet, with more allegations with regards to what apparently happened. But we have to wait and see, because a lot of people are interested in this case. Did Bobrisky serve his sentence in prison, or did he not?
I mean, this is a very tough one. I do remember initially the day that he was.
It's a very tough one.
I mean, it's tough in the sense that I remember when we thought he was in prison, and my heart really did go out to him. You know, just thinking about what our prison systems are like.
I don't think prison would have been safe for him. I don't think a male prison would have been safe for him.
Exactly my point.
Yeah.
So to now, after all of these weeks now, and I remember when he came out, I was looking, I said, Bobrisky has put on some weight, you know, he's looking a lot better than when he went in. But we just kind of chuffed that up to, you know, being a joke or whatever. So, but to now find out all these weeks after that the Nigerian people were actually misled to believe that he was actually serving a prison sentence. Meanwhile, there is an alleged 15 million naira, bribe that must have exchanged hands. Definitely, I cannot wait to find out what this investigation uncovers, because he cannot be the first person to have taken advantage of the system this way. I'm sure that there are others. And we were just talking about, Justice, Kekere Eko. Let's see exactly how, this particular story, pans out,
All right. Just a very quick intervention from me. I asked the question earlier about if those gentlemen weren't mentioned in the thing, but, as you have said, if there was a kind of investigation, I would imagine that will be a very fast investigation that will have led to two people being suspended. I will imagine that, except we are just looking for scapegoats, But it's okay, to be seen to be taking decisions. But I think that it shouldn't be a hurried decision that will deal with this issue.
But I think it's also a question of who's in charge of this prison.
Exactly.
That's why they went for those two people.
And they were not dismissed, they were suspended.
Yeah.
So
I'm saying that when you suspend people, are you done with the investigation that you're having with them? If they're on suspension, will they still be answerable? Are you still going to be asking them questions? I don't have a problem with it, but I'm saying that except you are basically suggesting to us that these are the people who collected money. Because we have not even established money. And it shouldn't be left just to the correctional center. What about the EFCC? What about the other aspects of the allegations as to why the money laundering, part of it was dropped? Why is it not fast on the part of EFCC, which is the, anti-corruption agency? How come it is the correctional center that has quickly, taken a decision? I agree with you. And the question will be that did he serve a sentence in prison as directed by the court? If there's going to be an alteration because of his safety, is the court aware? What is the procedure in taking him, to a safer place? And I'm speaking on Bobrisky's matter, as a man who understand what being a man, is. So at the end of the day, at what point, if he's guilty of anything, at what point are we going to say that, because his safety will be in jeopardy? Will we now be creating a special safe net for him every time he goes foul, he runs foul of the law? How does he work? How does he operate? Because we are also hearing from other people that he made a request, to a well-known person requesting for money so that he is able to pay for a special arrangement in prison. Those are the things that we need to deal with. And I don't think that we've seen a very dark man going to minister, going to all of this. This is not a celebrity, a fanfare. This is about corruption at the very heart of our judicial system, at the very heart of our correctional system, at the very heart of the agency that is in charge of, anti-corruption. And they must come out clean The procedure must be open to all to see, and this is not about whether anybody is trying to bamboozle anybody with emotional subject. No, let's deal with it as it is expected, so that we can have a basis to deal with others who have been taking advantage of the system. That would be my position.
Definitely.
On this Bobrisky matter.
All right, then that will do it on the week that was. But let's take a minute or two to bring you up to date with a couple of stories making the rounds. Starting off with Hurricane Helene has left an enormous path of destruction across Florida and the southeastern U.S. on Friday, killing at least 44 people, snapping towering oaks like twigs and tearing apart homes as rescue crews launched desperate missions to save people from flood waters. The wreckage extended hundreds of miles northward to northeast Tennessee, where a dangerous rescue situation by helicopter unfolded after 54 people were moved to the roof of a Unicoi County hospital as water rapidly flooded the facility. A series of airstrikes hit several locations in the southern suburbs of Beirut early on Saturday morning, causing several smaller explosions and rings of smoke intersecting over the skies of the Lebanese capital. Fire raged from at least one location, and smoke and flames were seen from above Beirut early Saturday. Residents reported jets flying overhead following a massive air raid that leveled several buildings in the southern suburb of Beirut, which Israel said targeted the leader of Lebanon's Hezbollah group. There were nearly a dozen other strikes in the same neighborhood, some just an hour after Israeli warning for residents to evacuate. Hundreds of Lebanese have since fled the area.
All right, then. That's all on the week that was today.